Have to kind of shoo you out today. It's a little bit unique. Okay, careful. Okay, Vicki, are we rolling? Okay. I'm here with Dr. David Rice. Dave, I could probably give your credentials, but I know that you're a pulmonologist. We have a crying baby who's making its way out. We'll let that move out. Okay.
I'm not a pediatrician, so.
So you're going to let that one go?
Yeah.
Okay. Dave is a pulmonologist at UPMC Passavant. He served in, which armed forces were you in?
Air Force.
Air Force. And so you were in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then you had an interesting post for Katrina in New Orleans, working the airport to triage people who were coming in during that terrible crisis. So you are a person who has a background in crisis management, and that's one of the reasons, probably the main reason why in your practice you were chosen to be the person to lead up the COVID responses.
Yeah, that, and I'm the medical director of the intensive care unit at Passavant as well, and so have been dealing with this for about the past 14 months on a daily basis. One of the things I feel like I should probably do is start singing some praise songs. I mean, I've never been up here with a microphone in my hand. That's
Please
not
do.
Something, yeah. Anyway.
Please do.
So to start this whole session off, just understand that I have no personal axe to grind here. I have no financial or vested interest in vaccine administration. My concern genuinely is for the people of the North Hills, the people of this church, the body of Christ, and have had a very rough year, as we all have had, dealing with this. And as time has gone on, have heard and got a lot of questions about vaccines in particular, and vaccines are a very potentially emotional topic for a lot of people. And so one of the things that has happened here recently is the kind of rate of vaccinations has started to wane, and I know that there's still a fairly significant percentage of people that have not been vaccinated. And so talk to Mark about maybe offering a question and answer session with me just based on my experiences over the past year. To go back a little further, my undergraduate degree is in molecular biology from Grove City. Went to medical school in Buffalo, served in the Air Force for 9 years, and have been the director of critical care at Passavant for, I think this is my 13th year. We're heavily invested in the community and heavily invested in the church. And I genuinely just don't want people to see me in another capacity, which is in the intensive care unit. I really don't want to continue to have to do the things that I've done to people over the past 14 months. And we're just looking for safety and an exit strategy to all of this. And the vaccine, from my perspective, is an important part of that.
Now, Dave, you have told me some stories, obviously without naming names or in any way identifying who the parties are, that are just really striking. Now, first of all, you're a very good friend of mine. We've been friends for maybe 10 years or so. This has been an incredibly tough year on you and people in your spot. And I want to thank you. I know you get that, and you probably hear it, but I've seen what this is, the toll it's taken on you, and I know it's been extremely, extremely hard. But one of the things that it relates to the vaccine question is what you've seen where people have had to deal with the grief of bringing the virus to their family members. Can you talk about that in some anecdotal ways without obviously betraying any privacies?
Yeah, so I just finished a week as the, in charge of the intensive care unit where we would, where we have housed our COVID patients. And, at the start of the week, I think 8 out of my 16 patients were, there as a result of COVID. So the idea that this is firmly in our rear view mirror is just not factual. I mean, the boots on the ground, we're still dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, and people are still getting sick, and their lives are still getting destroyed from this. A couple of anecdotal, issues that you read about these things, and I think the vast majority of people have been affected by COVID in the sense that, it's taken away the day-to-day things that they like, wearing masks, distancing, activities getting canceled, church life being changed, but they maybe don't have a personal relationship with somebody that's been critically ill or haven't gotten sick terribly ill themselves. And so they read about these things in the press, but it doesn't have that personal connection to them. You hear about the dangers of people bringing this to other family members or friends and maybe haven't had experiences with that, but I can tell you that's a very real occurrence, and it's occurring on a regular basis. One instance that this was just within the past week, and there are countless stories of this happening. A 60-something-year-old female trying to recover from a big cancer operation. Her otherwise healthy daughter acquired COVID, came to visit her mother at the hospital while she was recovering for her operation, then got sick, tested positive for COVID. The mother tested positive for COVID, and this week she died in the hospital as a result of inability for her to recover from an infection in the setting of a recent cancer operation. And these are things that you read about. These are things that I see, and these are things that are happening. And this young lady had to watch her mother pass away in the ICU and is dealing with the fact that she brought this illness in and now has this guilt that she has to unfortunately deal with for the rest of her life. And these
she
are
was asymptomatic, of course.
Right,
And
yeah.
she came in to visit her mom.
Right.
Feeling fine.
Yeah.
Traveled. Was she traveling from out of state?
Yeah.
And so brings it
Yeah.
in unknowingly.
Yeah.
Mom gets it, and then the next day she has symptoms, gets tested, she has it,
Right.
then mom tests
Yeah.
positive.
Yeah, and so these are things that are very real, and these are affecting lives on a day-to-day basis. Another instance this week was a otherwise healthy 60-something-year-old man whose daughter acquired COVID at high school, brought it home to him, and he ended up in the intensive care unit and is improving. But again, this is a devastating illness that he's going to have to deal with and recover from for the next several weeks to months. And so these are how these episodes are occurring. And these are the rationale, that's the rationale for even people that are low risk or aren't concerned about, acquiring COVID themselves, continuing to try to protect their loved ones and protect the community. And so, that's why vaccination, from my perspective, is still important. This is still happening. This is still, these aren't 8-10 months old stories. This is last week, and it's still going on, and people's lives are still getting destroyed by this. And, again, my concern is not even necessarily for the individual person, although it is. It's for my community. The reason that I get up to work every day and go into the hospital and deal with these things is that I'm part of the North Hills, and I care about the people in the North Hills, and I'm tired of watching people's lives get destroyed by this illness when there's something that can be done to prevent it.
Now, to that point, you told me a few weeks ago, and correct me on these facts, but you now will have vaccinated 90-year-olds come in who will be in for a few days because they get very sick, but they walk out. And previously, if they hadn't been vaccinated, like 100% of them would have died. And you have 57-year-olds who are unvaccinated who you might think, well, they're never going to get sick. I'm 63. And they're very sick. And you're looking at them thinking, in this era, you could have gotten vaccinated and you don't need to be here. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's frustration when we see people that have had ample opportunity to do something to prevent this. Now, that doesn't mean we don't take care of them and we don't treat them, but there's certainly, still a lot of people that are hesitant. And again, I understand the reasons for that, but have had opportunities and are getting sick even now that otherwise wouldn't have. Certainly you're going to read in the newspaper about people that have been vaccinated and still acquire COVID, and I've seen that personally. I've had, several admissions for people that have completed their vaccines, still acquired COVID, still got sick. But I can also tell you, to a person, in my experience with those people, they had a much milder form of illness and they survived, whereas otherwise they probably wouldn't have. And these are people that have had transplanted organs or on dialysis or are over 90. And those were the people that, pre-vaccine, I really genuinely would not have expected them to survive that illness. And now they are. And so, the idea that, well, people are still getting the infection after vaccine, so therefore it's not working, is not true either.
Now, one of the things you said, and it really reflected your heart, is that basically, the people who are getting hit by this the hardest are the vulnerable. And we as Christians should be those looking out for the vulnerable. And which populations do you describe as the vulnerable? Because you were telling me about that.
Yeah, so, certainly I've seen more than my share of otherwise healthy people that have been laid low by this and have been destroyed, or 40-something-year-olds that have no medical history that have not survived or have, had to progress onto ECMO and, their lives are going to be devastated as a result of this. But the vast majority of people that come in and get sick and don't do well with this are people with a lot of chronic medical conditions, are cancer patients, Down syndrome patients, what we would consider to be kind of the least of us from a Christian community, the vulnerable. The elderly are, by and large, mostly vaccinated now. And so what I've seen over the past couple of weeks is that the age range is not, nearly as high as it was before. My youngest patient in the ICU this week was 29, and he was otherwise healthy. He will survive. He will recover. But again, it's not just a nursing home illness, and people that are otherwise healthy and walking around 2 weeks ago can still end up under my care. But as this has played out, it's the vulnerable, the people with chronic medical conditions that can't protect themselves from this type of infection. They're the ones that have borne the brunt of this. And so as a community, part of, rationale for getting vaccinated, even if you're not at risk or don't consider yourself to be at risk, is still protecting these people.
I'm going to go ahead to our questions now, Dave. And if you're watching, you can do this via Slido. You basically would go to the email saying we were doing this, and on the email is a little place where you can pose your question. Now, Vicki, yes, okay, I have probably about 10 questions here. Let me see what we can get through. We agreed we'd probably go for 20 minutes or so. I have been vaccinated, but I am immunocompromised. I get mixed messages on whether I'm safe or not. Do you have any advice for me going forward?
I would still be cautious in that setting. Again, there's a lot of different levels of immunocompromise, and there are some people that, no matter what we give them, cannot mount an antibody response to this type of infection. And so, the most difficult patients that we've had in regards to this just kind of going on for now months at a time are people with liquid tumors, lymphoma or leukemia, and the treatments that are associated with that can be such a devastating treatment for people's innate immune system. If they get COVID, they tend to test positive, for 3, 4, 5 months at a time, or in the hospital for a very long period of time. We have people like my son, for instance, who are on immunotherapy or immune suppressive therapy for Crohn's disease, and we aren't seeing a tremendous number of people in that circumstance coming in with overwhelming COVID infections. And so, to answer that question, I would probably need a little more specifics about exactly what manner of immunocompromise you have. But, in that circumstance, the assumption, unfortunately, has to be that if you acquire COVID, you have a longer time to clear it. For instance, when we declare somebody COVID non-infectious that have been in the hospital and they've kind of gone through a couple of weeks of their illness, and then at the end of this, they're still recovering, we will say, all right, at this point in time, you're no longer shedding virus, you're no longer contagious, and we will take them kind of out of the heavy-duty precautions. If somebody is immunocompromised, depending on what manner they're immunocompromised, we tend not to do that. We tend to think that they are going to carry this infection and continue to shed it, and it's an active issue, and it can be for weeks or even months at a time.
Okay. Next question. How can we be sure that mRNA vaccines are safe to use? What evidence do we have that they are safe?
So one of the falsehoods about, and this has been a very hotly debated topic, and I understand that suddenly we have a new illness, and then within the span of what seems like months, we have a new vaccine that then is geared towards this. Well, mRNA vaccines in particular did not come about when COVID started. They have been researched and have been actively, created. Really, it's probably been 8 to 10 years that they have been working on this, and I think really what sped this up so dramatically is that this was a very good type of vaccine for this type of infection. And so, one of the concerns that a lot of my patients have is, wow, it takes typically several years to come to market with a vaccine, and now we have something that seemingly is brand new. mRNA vaccines are not new. They have been used in other illnesses, Ebola, but it's not that they just came up with this technology, last year. This has been in the works for several years, and now you have, a good, not a good type of infection, but the appropriate type of infection to utilize this technology. One of the questions that often, gets brought up is that the mRNA in this vaccine is somehow going to change your DNA. I can tell you that is not physically possible. That's not how bodies work. That's not how the cell works. You can't inject somebody with a messenger RNA and have it somehow back translated into your own DNA. That is not humanly possible. There is no risk that this vaccine is going to change your DNA as a person. One of the questions that I get a lot is, were fetal cells used to make this vaccine? And that's important as Christians, and that's not true either, that there was no usage of fetal stem cells in creation of this vaccine. People say, well, were you there when they made the vaccine? How can you be? Well, no, I was not at Pfizer lab, but I have to trust what people say, and they do not have any fetal, usage of stem cells that were used to create the vaccine. It can't change your DNA.
Okay.
It's, I've seen the deconstituted vaccine. I've reconstituted the vaccine. I injected my wife with the vaccine.
In the
It's
drive-through
not-
for Chick-fil-A,
Yeah,
I might
yes.
add.
There is no nanotechnology. Bill Gates is not tracking the vaccinated people. There is no microchip in the vaccine. It's just not true.
Those are
You
some of
know,
the outlier.
these are some of the things that I hear. But the vast majority of people have the safety concern that this is something that's brand new, and how do we know that this isn't going to harm people? And I can tell you that it isn't a brand new technology. It is, was a technology that was available, and this virus happened to set up very well for how this vaccine works. One of the other questions on your list I know is fertility issues, and there's a big resistance for particularly young women. And that came about, again, as a falsehood that there is a protein that is expressed on a placenta that is the same protein as what's expressed on the spike protein. And so that by getting the vaccine, you're going to then have antibodies against a placenta. So first of all, that's just not true. The proteins are not the same. Second of all, 16-year-old girls don't have a placenta. They have a uterus. The placenta is created from fetal tissue as the baby is developing. And so even if this were true, which it's not, there is no placental tissue for the antibodies to react to. The third thing that I would say that's counter to that is, well, if the answer is no vaccine and it's just to let everybody get COVID, well, how is that any different? So if you're creating antibodies to the spike protein via vaccine or versus natural infection, then aren't you going to have the same problem with infertility after the infection that you would have after the vaccine? And so I think that is a falsehood that was somehow had gained traction, but the basics of that protein structure, they aren't the same. And so, again, that's just not true.
Here's one. What are your thoughts on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine with the side effects of blood clots, albeit rare?
Yeah. So I personally have not seen that. I guess, and I think the reason why is it's exceedingly rare. So, when they paused this and they kind of analyzed the numbers of clotting associated with what's called thrombocytopenia, which is a drop in platelet count. They had administered somewhere in the order of 6 to 8 million doses and had identified, I think at the end of it was probably 12 cases. So we were looking at an incidence of somewhere on close to 1 in a million. And after analysis, what they found is that it's actually not any higher than the background rate of this type of a process happening, which is exceedingly rare. Now, having said that, with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they have put some warnings on it, and it tends to be, had been more prominent in kind of younger women for whatever reason, which again, they just might be at risk for this episode happening with or without the vaccine. So I think that if you're in that age range and you have a concern that may be a problem that you would have, which again seems not any higher than what occurs just in the natural population, then get a different one.
I got Pfizer. I got Pfizer. My daughter's got Moderna, and my wife got Johnson & Johnson. So we've had exposure to all of them. Will all three of the vaccines require yearly boosters?
I would expect that, yes. I think for a period of time, and I don't know if necessarily we even know if you need a booster in regards to creating antibodies, but I think that akin to the flu shot, which has to be administered every year, the virus is changing. And so, we're seeing at this point in time, as we sit here right now, even the variants that are coming from the UK or India, we think that the vaccine still covers all the variants that exist out there, but I think that there is going to be a booster shot offered in not necessarily boosting in the sense that your immune system needs to be able to create more antibody to the wild type of COVID infection, but to actually protect you from what is going to be the dominant variant, which is changing.
Good question here. Do they have any clue why some people get sick after the first shot, some after the second, some don't get sick at all? Any data on that?
So, no, not particularly. We tend to find that younger people that have a more robust immune system tend to respond a little more vigorously as far as symptoms. Arm ache, 10, 14, 20 hours of generalized malaise. I had it myself when I got this, particularly the booster dose. We don't think that necessarily is a true marker of your body's immune response to the vaccine. So if you have gotten the vaccine and you didn't have an overwhelming response, that doesn't mean you're not protected from the virus. That we do know. But the response to the vaccine as far as how your body, how you feel, is highly variable, just as your response to the infection is highly variable. You can have two people that would look identical on paper that share a COVID vaccine, and I've seen this over and over again. Family members come in. I've admitted more husband and wife combinations over the past year with the same illness than I have ever in my career with any other illness. This isn't even close. And one survives and the other one doesn't. And certainly there's variations in their overall health, but it's the same infection, and some people just clear it in 3, 4, 5 days. Other people end up in the intensive care unit, and a lot of that is how their immune system responds to the infection itself, and that's highly variable.
I'm going to see if anyone here has a question. You may be here because you have a question, but one that I got from a friend who wasn't able to come today because she was traveling. She said she'd read something by a Belgian doctor who had been part of developing another vaccine, and that he said it's much better not to get the vaccine because when you get the vaccine, your body responds to that variant, and it's no longer able to respond to the variety of variants that you might get in the course of natural exposure. What do you say to that?
So I don't understand how that would be true. So one of the things that I point to that speaks against this is India. So early on, when we were surging in India, kind of had their rise, and then their cases fell. A lot of people thought, well, the reason that India is doing so well with this is that they are naturally immune to a lot of things. You know, the environment isn't cleanly. They are exposed to things over and over again, and therefore their immune system is somehow superior to those of us in this country. Well, look at what's happened in India for the past month and a half. I think that that is disproven. This is a uniquely challenging infection. If you have a vaccine and you have antibodies to even the strains that are in circulation right now, that doesn't limit your body's immune system to responding to a variant. That doesn't limit your body's immune system to getting a booster shot and creating antibodies to something else. I mean, that's just not how the immune system works. And so, you know, again, if that were the case, then as time went on over years and we all received a different variant of influenza vaccine, flu cases should just be rising exponentially as time goes on, because we now can't respond to a different influenza. That's just not true. That's just not how the body works.
You said, and I want to go now to the audience here, that there's a lot of quackery going on in this, and a lot of people getting attention on the internet whose ideas are pretty out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's, you know, not unusual. Do I pretend to have all the answers to this? Absolutely not. I mean, we're all struggling to learn as we go, and, you know, we don't have years and years of experience to counter this infection, not just from a preventative standpoint, but from a therapeutic standpoint. You know, this has been a very real-time. Studies come out, and I change my management of COVID patients that day, and that is how this has evolved. You know, so I think that as time goes on, we are learning more about this, and we will continue to learn more about this, and things will get more and more refined. But even in pre-COVID, there was nothing harder for an intensivist to deal with than a viral pneumonia, because there just isn't therapy. You know, if somebody gets critically ill from a staph pneumonia or a strep pneumonia or Legionella, I have antibiotics, and I know that within a period of time, I'm going to kill this infection. With viruses, that is not always a reliable therapeutic option, and certainly with COVID, it's not. And so it comes back to preventing people from getting this infection to begin with. I can treat you, and I can take care of you, and I have medications, but a lot of this is prayer and hope, and I'm along for the ride. And as this infection evolves in people and they get more and more sick, I start to do things to them that are not easy to come back from. And so my goal with talking about the vaccine is to prevent it. I don't want to see any of you end up in my ICU. I really don't. And the idea of just letting people get the infection and letting it run wild and having everybody develop innate immunity, well, that's fine if people aren't still dying from it every day, but that's the reality.
Who out here has a question? I know we answered a lot that maybe you had, but who has a question here? Raise your hand, and Adam will bring a mic over to you. Right behind you. Adam?
We'll just have you talk on the mic so people can hear online.
Okay. So do you have a favorite vaccine over one or the other versus Pfizer? This is like a three-part question.
Okay.
And are there other vaccines coming, other types that are coming? And what if you just have antibodies where you've never had COVID or you've never gotten a vaccine? You know, does that antibodies cover you?
So, you know, we tend to think that the vaccine-induced antibodies are longer lasting and a little more robust, but that's, I think, still vague, right? So the idea that you may have had COVID and recovered, are you at any higher risk than somebody that's been vaccinated? You know, to be honest, that's unclear. You I've had family members, both my parents had COVID, and I still wanted them to get the vaccine because I think it's safe, and I think that any added protection that they can get, some of your antibody production naturally seems to depend on the severity of illness that you've had. And so, people that have had a very mild case of COVID might not have lasting antibodies to the infection. So, if you already have antibodies, again, my recommendation and our recommendation as a medical community and my personal recommendation to people that I love has still been to get the vaccine. Do I have a personal choice? I don't. I think that if you look at the data between Pfizer and Moderna, which are roughly equivalent, and you look at the Johnson & Johnson, I think that there's some variation there in the timing of when those clinical trials were done. And so, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine tends to show a little less effectiveness, but it was done in an era where maybe there were more variants. Also, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine would probably reach the same effectiveness as the Pfizer or the Moderna if you were given a booster shot of it. So they wanted a single-dose vaccine to be able to reach out to more rural communities and kind of increase the number of people that have at least some immunity to it. But that could certainly be probably boosted to the 90% effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine if you gave a second dose of the Johnson & Johnson one. No, that's a viral vector. So that's, you use a virus called adenovirus that accesses our cells that way. And then the machinery of the virus minus the actual infectious part of the virus is then expressed through our own messenger RNA and then, yeah. I mean, the mRNA is really that's the newest, hottest thing in the market. And I expect that as time goes on, we will start probably seeing more and more of the typical other vaccines being manufactured in an mRNA type of vaccine because it is proven to be so effective. Are there other vaccines? Yes, there are. If you look at other countries, the predominant vaccine in India is not an mRNA or a DNA vaccine. It's kind of a crushed spike protein vaccine, which is the kind of traditional, old school, original vaccine, right? You give kind of an attenuated virus or a virus, part of the virus that then your body reacts to as opposed to expressing it on your own cells. And that is much less effective. I mean, that's the typical kind of influenza vaccine where you give, attenuated or dead influenza and create an antibody response to it. And that's why the success rate with, preventing infections in those countries is lower than what we see here.
Anybody else in the room? Yes, Amanda.
Hi. I've been reading a medical discussion board between doctors, nurses, and medical professionals based on their individual responses to some of the vaccines. And a lot of what they've been reporting are like weeks after getting their shot, they're still having like decreased muscle strength, lots of fatigue, still some central nervous system issues, sometimes neurological side effects. How common does that seem? Because it doesn't seem to get reported in the news very much. Yeah, that would be my first question. I have another one after this.
So uncommon enough that I haven't seen it.
Okay.
And, within UPMC, I think 65,000 of the UPMC employees have been vaccinated. And all of my partners, all of my staff, all of my ICU staff, I have not, and again, having now seen people that on regular follow-up in the office, and, I might see in my pulmonary practice, 18 patients in a day, and the vast majority of them have now been vaccinated, and I have not seen people respond that way. The reaction that I have seen has been, my arm hurt for a day, and I had kind of a generalized malaise for 10, 12, 14 hours and took a dose of Tylenol and it went away. There are people that have had serious reactions to previous vaccines have had anaphylactic reactions to vaccines. Those are things that we do take very seriously. People call, and I've had several patients that have responded to previous vaccines in the past in a very untoward way, and I don't discount that. And I've sent them to an immunologist to have test doses administered, and if they do get the vaccine, I make sure that they get it in a hospitalized setting and have epinephrine available. Having said that, all the people that have had sent that route, even with previous serious reactions to vaccines, have not had a problem with it. And again, that's my experience.
What's your other question, Amanda?
I don't know if you'll have an answer for this, but I know that neurological side effects have been an issue for some people who have gotten COVID. I don't know if it's connected to the spike protein, but is there any research that's been done based on how this might affect someone that could have a risk for ALS in their family?
That's a good question. No link that I've seen.
Okay.
But the effect of COVID post-infectious, is very real. And there are a lot of people that are 10 months out, 11 months out from their infection and haven't recovered full function from a pulmonary standpoint or a neurologic standpoint, and to the degree that we actually have a kind of COVID recovery clinic.
Yeah.
And one of those things that we are still learning about and is very real. And from my perspective, is yet another reason that you don't want this infection. You really don't. I mean, there are so many different ways that it can put the hammer down on you. And
Anybody else in the room? Yes, Linda.
Mark, did you see some more questions?
I did. I don't think we're going to get to all the questions. Some of them are on themes, but we'll try, and we're going to go till 1. We're going to go for another 6 minutes. Linda.
I hope you didn't already answer this, and I just didn't understand it, but as far as infertility, and you were talking about the protein and the placenta, should people or young girls who are thinking of starting a family put that on hold, at least until the vaccination takes place and the booster?
so as far as getting pregnant,
Right.
so that's actually an excellent question. So one of the things that gets brought up is that particular population, pregnant women. And, as with any medication in pregnancy, it's very, very hard to ever have anybody willing to study a drug or a vaccine in pregnant population. When we look at the data for people that were unknowingly pregnant and got the vaccine, or knowingly were pregnant and got the vaccine, we aren't seeing a problem with how they're doing as far as, carrying the fetus to term or having any problems with their pregnancy that goes above the background, problems that we'd see. I can tell you for a fact, however, that pregnant women that get COVID do not do well, and they are at higher risk of requiring ICU care, requiring the ventilator, requiring ECMO, and that is definitively
What's
proven.
ECMO?
That is putting somebody on heart-lung bypass for sometimes weeks at a time because their lungs are so sick that you can't oxygenate them with a ventilator or with anything else, and so you actually withdraw the blood from their body, run it through a machine, and that has to be continuous, which is a devastating thing for people to have to go through. And so while I can tell you that any drug that's new comes to market, it's very hard to get true FDA approval in the setting of pregnancy, whether it's an asthma inhaler. Like, there's really only one asthma therapy that I have that's even what we call category B, which is considered safe, because nobody's willing to do these tests on a pregnant population. From what we see in the information that we have is that it's safe, and what we know is that getting COVID at 7 months pregnant or 8 months pregnant is a very, very dangerous circumstance for the mother and for the baby.
So a lot of what you're saying, Dave, is we may be judging these dangers or concerns about the vaccine as being quite minuscule, and that might be fair to say. But the dangers of getting it to most people are not minuscule at all, even if you're a 27 or 29-year-old or 57 and have no comorbidities.
And again, my perspective on that is skewed, right? I'm not a primary care doctor. I don't see scores of people coming in with COVID that have lost their sense of taste for 5 days, right? If that's their symptom, they don't make it to me.
Right.
I see the bad part of this, and I don't want to see it anymore.
Well, I'm going to ask you these questions so we can get them out. Give me the 10-second answer on these. This one's a little bit more medical. Can there be antibody-dependent enhancement with these vaccines, which I've heard has been observed in SARS and other coronaviruses?
So if you've had the infection and then you get the vaccine, are you potentially going to have enhanced immunity? Yes, I do think that is true.
Okay. Do I need the vaccine if I've had the virus?
Again, my recommendation is yes.
Okay. Since you've debunked some of the rumors that have been circulating, what are the actual dangers of getting the vaccine?
So at this point, it would be an immediate reaction to the vaccine. That's really what we've
Just
we've
that
seen.
short-term 18-hour thing.
Yeah, and again, it's, that's based on my personal experience with, what I'm seeing in the hospital still is COVID infections. And the number of vaccinated people at this point is far outstripping the number of confirmed COVID cases that we've had. And I haven't admitted one COVID-related vaccine problem to the hospital
Okay.
or to the ICU. And so,
Yeah.
that's just
People
what
take a couple Tylenol, they feel bad on a Saturday, and they come back.
and that's what I see. And, again, everybody's got to take their own personal stock in, the newness of this. And that's a very real concern, and I understand that. But I don't see scores of vaccinated people getting admitted. I don't see any.
Because of the vaccine.
Because of the vaccine, I still see COVID patients coming in, getting sick, and dying.
Two last ones. Is there any situation you think someone should not get vaccinated at this point? Anyone?
So, if you have had a, dramatically violent anaphylactic response to previous vaccines, I would, like I said, my recommendation for those patients that I've answered that question for is that they see an immunologist.
Good. Good.
But short of that, if you have had a reaction to something within the vaccine itself, then that would be another, again, something that an immunologist, I would want them to give you a test dose and observe in the office and make sure that you aren't going to have an overwhelming allergic reaction to the vaccine.
Last question. If the vaccine is effective, why are they saying you can still get COVID or carry it?
Because it's not 100% effective. And so, again, have I seen people that have had the vaccine and gotten COVID? Yes, I have. And as providers, we all have. Have I seen that every year with influenza for the past 20 years of practice? I have. Do those patients almost invariably do better with an infection that they've been previously vaccinated to? Absolutely. Have I seen people that I thought otherwise would not have survived a COVID infection that had the benefit of vaccine 2-3 weeks prior that walked out of the hospital? I have. So, are we going to eradicate every person because the vaccines are not 100% effective from potentially acquiring it? No. Is it going to protect people from getting very sick and meeting me? I think that it is. And, as Christians, one of the anecdotes that I kind of bring up for people is, it reminds me of the story of the man who was in his house as the floodwaters were rising, right? And so his neighbor comes by and says, the flood's coming, I think we ought to seek higher ground. And he says, the Lord will protect me. Floodwaters rise higher. He's now on the second floor of his house. Somebody in a boat comes by and says, hop in the boat, we're going to go to higher ground. He says, the Lord will protect me. Now he's on his roof. Somebody in a helicopter comes by and says, we got to get you out of here. The Lord will protect me. The guy dies in the flood, meets the Lord face to face, says, why didn't you protect me? And the Lord said, well, I sent your neighbor, I sent a boat, and I sent a helicopter. So protect yourselves from this. all right? This is an opportunity to remain safe. And if I didn't feel like it was safe to get it, I wouldn't have gotten it myself. I wouldn't have given it to my wife. I wouldn't have given it to my parents. My boys are scheduled to get it. And so I wouldn't do anything in this circumstance for myself or my family that I wouldn't recommend to other people.
Well, I want to thank Dave. I'm sure there may have been more questions, but we've answered a lot and you've taken some time. I also want to say how kind it is for Dave to take his birthday. So let's give him a hand and thank Dave. And I feel a special debt to him because some people have paid me compliments. Not all have been compliments on the way we've managed it, but the only reason I've been able to make good decisions is because I've had Dave to call. And every time I text him, this busy guy says, I'll call you this afternoon. He would take time and walk me through it. So we are a very blessed church to have someone like Dave. So thank you, Dave.
Don't I look good for 28 years old?
Thanks, and have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.